really exposed to or only lived in low context cultures might evaluate it. So a good way that I've kind of been able to conceptualize it for my students in the past is take the example of handing your credit card to someone working, say, at like a restaurant or a fast food establishment, to taking your credit card, running it, and giving it back to you. In a low context culture, you may instead say, may I have your card, please? Thank you. You use kind of verbal statements as a way to interact in a professional level when taking someone's credit card, swiping and then giving it back. In a high context culture, there may not be communication or verbal communication that communicates that. It may be done through the use of a bowing of the head or grabbing someone's credit card with two hands as opposed to one. So you might find, like here in the United States, if you've ever worked in, the restaurant or fast food industry, you may not have paid a lot of attention to whether the person working at the register uses one or two hands to grab your credit card. But in a high context culture, that's a much more significant focus because the message being communicated is, I want to add extra attention and to show care to something that is of great importance and value to you. And so as a result of that, I'm going to use two hands, right, as a way to show that care and significance, as opposed to communicating that with you through my words. So that's something that,
oh my word. Hang on a minute. I have to wipe it.
That's okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. Okay, because I've seen some waiters take my credit card with two hands. I never knew the significance of that.
Yeah. And that's not always, but that's often an indication that that person may have spent time, living in countries that are more high context by nature, or maybe you have had parents who instilled that as a value, or maybe had a boss or manager that said, this is how you show the greatest respect for someone's kind, like credit card or debit card. Something that's important to them is showing care through two hands as opposed to one. So yeah, it's a small difference, but it's very significant in what it embodies about larger cultural differences between high and low context cultures.
So how does this play out racially?
Yeah, so that's a big question, and really, to me, it goes back to the ways in which nonverbal behaviors are interpreted versus verbal behaviors, and which has the greater significance in denoting whether someone is acting racist or not. And I'll give you one that I'm sure, like Dr. Jean, I know that you will have far more experience with this one than me. But one that I've, talked with a lot of, especially Black women about this, and read up on this and talked with different folks about this as well. There are several Black women in my life who have said that growing up, they had a lot of white folks say, oh, your hair looks so cool. Can I grab your hair and touch it? And the act of saying that and making that kind of verbal statement, I think for especially a lot of white folks who are not cognizant of what message that could send from a high context perspective. The argument often is made is like, look, that person who's often white is seeing something that's different, and therefore using their verbal messages to say, this is different, I haven't experienced that, can I touch your hair so I can now have that experience and that understanding? So if viewed through a specific low context cultural lens, often the case is made, that's not racist, that's not otherizing to that Black woman because I'm just asking about your hair, right? Whereas to the Black women in particular that this happens to, what that nonverbal or that high context message is, you are weird, you are different, how you look and how your hair is styled and how it naturally is different. I'm going to make those differences really highlighted in a really awkward way. And I'm going to essentially out myself as not understanding and respecting your own bodily autonomy. I'm instead going to use it just as a way to fulfill my curiosity. And those are the types of examples that I think play out far too common, unfortunately, in our society. And unfortunately, I think oftentimes white folks are not willing to look at the deeper high context meaning if they feel that's okay or acceptable to say, hey, can I touch your hair? Because if you're taught to then to ignore or not be aware of kind of the more indirect interpretations of your words, then it allows you to get away with saying or acting in ways that may be very demeaning to that other person based off what their experiences are, based off of kind of culturally, historically, what they and others who look like them have gone through. So I don't know if that example like kind of communicates that clearly, but I think that is a big example of how there are certain folks who would say, no, that's not a racist action because I'm just asking about your hair. But I think in viewed through a high context cultural lens, it is kind of by nature a racist action because you're otherizing that person by using their body and their hair as like something to experience and as something to take control of, as opposed to respecting it on an autonomous equal level.
Okay, so I'm still struggling with the high context, low context
Yeah.
meaning. And
Sure.
here's why. That example